So in that video we've looked at our first time management technique or tool. They're calling it Eisenhower's matrix. It's also called Eisenhower's grid, divided into 4 quadrants, as you can see there on the screen: do, plan, delegate, eliminate. Sometimes the wording's slightly different, but they mean the same thing. And as they said, it's about managing tasks, and tasks are about managing your time. Reducing stress leads to increased productivity, they said. And that's not just because you get more time, it's because if you're less stressed and you're more organized, you're more likely to be more effective. They were using it for looking at personal things and work things. Yeah, you can use it for both. One of the keys, I think, is about saying no. Those things in the delegate and eliminate, we need to learn to say no sometimes, and that's much easier if we've been through the process and worked out what we've got to do and worked out what our planning is. We can then justify saying no. They said about someone ringing up asking for a favour, for somebody to attend a meeting, and about delegating it, but that's sometimes about being able to say no to someone. So if we can get things sorted out by using those quadrants and know what is the immediate things we need and what are the planning, then we can move forward. Now, good time management is about expanding the planning area, because the planning area is normally the important stuff. You're a supervisor, a team leader, a manager. You need to be planning ahead while other people are doing the stuff that needs to be done. What is it he said? Eisenhower said, what's important is seldom urgent, and what's urgent is seldom important. And that's the point he was getting to. The stuff that's being done, the do, should be stuff that's already been planned. Everybody knows what they're doing and they're moving forward. It's the planning, the next stage, is so that we can be ready and have good time management. That's the important bit. So trying to expand that planning stage is key to good time management. One of the interesting points on there that people struggle with is delegating. So let's have a look at some keys to effective delegation. Delegation, there's the king painting lines on the road. You may not be a king, but you are a team leader, a manager, whatever your title. You can't have the time to do everything, and you shouldn't be doing everything. Delegation is an essential management and leadership skill. As highlighted in Eisenhower's matrix, it's one of the key ways to save you some time, but it also helps you avoid burnout, stress. It allows you to focus on more critical tasks, helps you develop, empower, motivate your team, members of your team, and it's key to retention and employee satisfaction. It's about entrusting others to take on important tasks and activities. That lets you know that you believe in them. It helps you develop and learn new skills, build their confidence, open up opportunities, and show them how they can take responsibility, contribute more to the organisation. Used properly, it can be an important tool in team building, developing the organisation's skill mix and its workforce planning. So let's have a look at some keys to effective use of delegation. So the first thing is invest to save. What I mean by that is invest in your time to save you time in the future, because in lots of situations doing something yourself is obviously going to be faster than asking someone else to do it, particularly the first time. So you're investing for the future, and you're also taking the time to teach and motivate staff, and that'll be repaid later when the work gets done properly and they can start taking responsibility, because they can start reproducing that on a regular basis without your day-to-day involvement. And that leaves you free to do the more important things, such as the planning. It's about engaging people. If we rely on the old adage, I pay them to do that and I'll tell them what to do and they can get on with it, well, things get done, but more importantly, do they get done properly? It's not that straightforward, is it? We all know getting people to do work and do it well involves engagement, persuasion, and effective delegation is about involvement and a two-way conversation or agreement. It's about giving clear direction. You can say to somebody, could you just take care of that, whatever it is, and that's fine if it's a routine or simple task, but they're not the sort of things we're probably going to be delegating. New tasks or new projects require clear direction and communication. If the staff feel confident and motivated and understand what they're doing, then they're more likely to have a good opportunity to put it into practice. You need to give them specific, clear expectations relating to what will be achieved and what the goal is, what activities it might include, and importantly, what levels of authority come with it. So what are they allowed to do without coming back to you? What can they take responsibility for? And you need to make sure that it's not just that they understand it, but that you've clearly communicated it and that they've had a chance to ask questions. The next one is don't force it. And that can be for yourself as well, because delegating can be a challenge to a leader who's not used to it. If you struggle to give up responsibility or authority and you start with then you can start with the less urgent, non-critical tasks, the things that don't matter so much if it goes wrong. You still need to give clear directions, but it will be less complicated, it'll be less critical if it doesn't go right, and you'll have less pressing timescales, so you won't stress as much about it. So giving up that can be an easier start. But you're not abdicating. Delegation is not about giving up the responsibility totally, it's about giving the required authority needed, but it's not all on their shoulders. You're not relinquishing total accountability, because as a leader you can't simply pass the buck and say, oh well, I gave it to them to do. You need to be there to provide guidance, to give them feedback, to track the results, and I would say sometimes let them know how they're doing, and also give credit when it all goes well. And the key to that, I think, is being able to match skills to people. You're going to have people in your team with different skills, and they're going to have different levels, and it's about, sometimes there are not things that they were necessarily employed for, so they weren't the things that they were specifically employed for. Delegation ways of utilising those talents, of drawing those other talents, is out of using those experiences that they might have brought from another role, and that can be to the benefit of the team as a whole, and can be very motivational for the individual, but also for the team. If somebody else within the team can start to take responsibility for things, they can see that as a boost for the team. And finally, we need to recognise and reward. So delegation is much easier if we've got people who are seeking those challenges, who are coming forward, expecting to take responsibilities, so they become engaged, as we're saying in step 2. And if they're seeking that responsibility and have a good attitude towards their work, that normally comes from the fact that they know what they're doing is being appreciated and being recognised, therefore they're keen. You can have lots of incentives such as pay and bonuses, and they're quite useful, but many people are rewarded by just the thought of that they're being treated as an individual, that it's being recognised that they're doing a good job, and they're being given extra opportunities and extra responsibilities. That can be enough motivation. We'll talk about motivation in a little more detail in the next unit, Unit 300, leading people, but they are the steps to key effective use of delegation. Hopefully those effective steps to delegation are useful. There's a handout on those in the resources, and if you follow those key steps and use them as a checklist when you're delegating tasks and make sure you've met all those things, then you should be able to put together some effective delegation. But it takes practice for them, but also practice for you to delegate. The next thing we're going to look at is another time management tool. That's the 4 Ds. It advocates making 4 decisions that we can use to protect our precious resource, and that's time. And they are drop, delay, delegate, and do. Firstly, we'll focus on dropping. Dropping a task, obviously, is the simplest way to gain some time. It's like the eliminate on Eisenhower's matrix. If we drop it, we've got to make sure it's obviously non-urgent and unimportant. There are many things we do each day which have probably become habit, that if we drop them, they wouldn't change anything. By that I mean they wouldn't impact on the progression we need to make towards our goals. However, they're often things that we like doing, and therefore we think they're important to us. But we need to make sure we review the time we spent on these things and figure out if there's anything we can drop. I'm talking now about when we've got busy workloads, not in your normal every working day. You might want to keep those in because they may be useful. They may be part of your relaxing time. But we need to make sure that when we get down to-do lists and things we need to do, that we have some form of prioritizing. And this is one of those things where we're making that decision. Is it something we can drop? At that point, it may be worth saying that there's something called time mapping, which you can do. And in the resources, there's an article from Forbes magazine that gives you a time map. It's sometimes quite useful to look at your time map and see what you are utilizing your time for in your normal working day. The second we're going to concentrate on there, or the 4Ds concentrate on, is delaying. Even if we're not dropping those things, because that's hard to do, we may feel that there are things that are more important or urgent than others. And then there's deciding if they actually are, or are we just putting things off because we're procrastinating, making ourselves busy doing other things to avoid the things that we don't want to do. It's just an excuse. We'll say we're busy doing things and we can't do that because of this. And sometimes that's because we're putting off the most important thing because we're not confident and we're not happy to do it. If we continue to delay these things, and they're being delayed on a regular basis, then really they should be moved into the drop category, because if we can continue to delay them and we can get away without doing them, then are they really important enough, and should we be putting them into the drop? And finally on there we've got delegating, and we've just discussed the benefits of delegating and how it's an investment in our time and an investment in our team. So we need to be thinking about what we can delegate to others and what skills we have in the team. And of course we may already have identified tasks that we can use in the delay or drop that we could pass on to the delegation category. And then there's only 3 Ds there, because the most important one is do. These are the tasks we're left with, and by a process of elimination, these should really be the important tasks that we're left with. Everything else has been put out to someone else, or we've delayed it, or we've dropped it. Now we've left with the things we need to do. We can now order these and then decide which ones we're going to do first. Lakin's ABC method is a simple method. It's a technique that's been used in business management for a long time to rank activities by some criteria. So it's about assigning a priority status of A, B or C to an item on a to-do list. A being a must-do, high priority, critical item that's got a close deadline or a high performance level, and so on. So what we're first talking about is making a decision about which category they fit into. So A is tasks that are perceived to be urgent and important, so that's organizational, critical, others relying on you completing something so they can get something done, stuff with tight deadlines. B is about tasks that are deemed to be important but not urgent, so they might be things like longer term planning tasks, things that are to make sure that in the future things that are in A are running correctly. So this is the planning bit that we were talking about in Eisenhower's matrix. And then C are tasks that are either neither urgent or important, but it could also include tasks that are urgent but not important. Simple things like, I don't know, there's a courier due to pick something up and it's not packaged yet, so it hasn't got a deadline to get somewhere. It's not a massively important customer's item, but the fact that the courier is going to arrive and it isn't in a package yet means it's important. It's urgent that we get it packaged, although it's not that important. So we put all these into the groups, and then we've got a group of A's, a group of B's, a group of C's, and then to add further prioritization, we then rank them in those groups. So in A you'll have a number of tasks and they'll be ordered 1 to 10. In B you'll have a number of tasks, they'll be ordered 1 to 10, and then in C you might have a number of tasks that are ordered 1 to 5. The important thing is we can, after we've done that, we can then start to look at whether the tasks in group B can be moved to A or C to refine it, because if they're sitting in there and they're important but not urgent, we can decide whether they need to go into B. B's need to go into A or C to refine it a little bit more. Often used with something combined, other problem solving sort of things such as parental analysis, and we'll look at those when we look at the problem solving unit 316 later on, and also can be used for longer term planning. You could start to think about the fact of, A being stuff that needs to be done this today, B being stuff that needs to be done this week, or C being stuff that needs to be done in a longer term. So you can utilize that prioritization for different things, but the principle is prioritizing things into A, B, and C, and then ranking them in order. So let's start to recap and sort of sum up what time management is all about. We've discussed what it means and how important it is, and we've discussed that it needs to become a habit, a learned behavior, so that we're doing it without realizing we're doing it. Probably using one of those tools or adapting those to find a method that works for us. But it should include planning effectively. You need to plan your day in advance. You need to have prepared a to-do list or a task plan where you've jotted down the important activities and you've used one of those tools that we've talked about to decide what's important. It identifies what needs to be done in that day and how much time you're going to need to spend on it. And be careful not to overload that, because we have a tendency to think we can get everything done and we can't. So there needs to be contingency built in there so that we can stick to the plan. Don't begin any fresh work unless you've finished the previous task on the list, because remember, you planned it. Cross things off as you've done them. I know it sounds simple, but in your mind you're just crossing them off, and ensure that you finish the task and check the time frame you've used. If something comes along or you're requested to do something else, it's much easier. As we said, you need to learn to say no, but it's much easier to say no if you've got a planned list that you can refer to and say why, because of what your priorities are, how you've planned your day, rather than just saying I don't know what I'm doing. Or if you do have to do it because it's critical and the boss has said that he wants it done, then you've got a list which you can adjust and move things into to get it done. It's about setting goals and objectives. Having clear goals or objective is critical. And if needs be, or really I would advocate spending time sitting and writing them down. Setting targets for yourself and making sure they're realistic and achievable, and looking at who else you might need to rely on to complete those targets. It's also about setting deadlines for yourself and striving hard to meet those. Do not wait for other people to be saying, oh, where's that? If you've set a target and set a deadline, you can tell them when they're going to be expecting it, so they're not going to be hurrying you or rushing you. So you're taking ownership. You are the best person to set deadlines for yourself. You know how much time needs to be devoted to a particular task, how many days or hours, and use some sort of planner, whether it's putting reminders in your calendar, whether it's a written diary, but have clear set out deadlines about when and what has to be completed. Next is delegating effectively. You need to learn to say no. We've talked about delegation. You can't do everything, and there are other people in your team who want to help. Obviously, those tasks and those responsibilities are going to have to be delegated dependent on when they need to be done, what the person's skills are and what the interests are, and also their knowledge about things. But if you follow the key points outlined in the handout for effective delegation, you should be okay, and it takes practice, so work with it. We need to prioritize things as per their importance and urgency. We need to know what needs to be done today, what can be done by the end of the month, which tasks are important, taking into account things such as what tasks are critical for other people. So are you doing something that someone else can't start the next stage of the process, which is progressing towards the goal until you've handed in the work? So think about things like that. And finally, it's about being able to spend the right amount of time on the right activities. We need to be working out where we're using our time. We said about the time map. We don't want to be wasting time on a day when we could be using it for something else. So sometimes we might have to plan when we're going to do our emails, when we're going to do our phone calls, whatever, because yes, there's things that need to be done there, but do they need to be done when you're doing them, or is there something else you could be doing and those emails could be done in a quiet period later on? So all key points of time management, and we need to be making sure that we're looking at all those as we plan our day. Okay then, so let's have a quick recap and see what we've covered in this session. We had 3 aims. We said we would understand feedback mechanisms, they were to understand learning styles, and to understand personal development planning. And as part of that, we had some things that by the end of the session we'd be able to do. And to do those, we've looked at different sources of feedback mechanisms and how they differ, and the importance of getting an all-round picture using different sources of feedback. We've looked at learning styles, and we've identified some different types, from the VARC, which was very simple, through to more complicated things like Felder and Silverman. And we've looked at different types of training and development we could use so that we can provide it for all sorts. We're going to do an end of unit assessment, which I'm going to go through in a minute, which will get you to look at your personal learning style and compare it with the team members. And then we went through the purposes and key stages of planning your own personal development with the PDP and the process. And then finally, we've just looked at time management, the importance, some time management tools and some tactics we can use in prioritizing our activities and the benefits that will bring. So on the next slide, we'll just go through what you need to do for your final unit assignment. Then, so we've reached the end of this session and the end of this unit. There is an end of unit assessment, which is a little bit more substantial than the pieces of activities and work you've been doing so far. And there's a lot to go through, but it's all explained in the sheet in the resources. It involves you reviewing the sessions we've done and using the activities that we've completed during the session. So make sure you use those and utilize those. They can either be added into the document, or they can be attached as an annex, or they can be referred to. Ensure when you're explaining things that you're not just giving a definition, so you're not just saying what it is, you're explaining what you believe in it, and use your own words to build that up and show that knowledge. If you utilize research or reference something from the internet, then just say where it's from, so you can include something, say so and so and so is from this, but I think this. So just go through it, give your information, and also at the end it asks you to start completing a reflective journal and to start your PDP. And there are templates and resources and guides on how to write a reflective journal in the resources. So you have to complete that and submit it. The date for submission will be agreed with your assessor. So if you're not aware of that or you're unsure, check with your assessor. And good luck. See you in the next unit.